as well. All right. So, as I told you guys on Monday, I'm a muscle physiologist. So obviously I think muscles are important. I think muscles are cool. And so, because it's my class, I don't care what your book starts with. If anybody, y'all have looked in the book at all, right? The book does not go in the right order, according to me. My opinion, book doesn't go in the right order. We're going to start, okay, with muscle. Because to me, maybe I'm biased, everything else that we do the rest of the class is going to flow from and be dependent upon how skeletal muscle works. Okay? How skeletal muscle works. So I know it's early in the morning, and I didn't tell you guys this on Monday, but when there are days, if I ask a question and you guys won't answer, you know what we do? One, we sit in weird, awkward silence until one of you psychologically feels the need to fill it with your voice. But two, we will just stand up and do wall sits until somebody decides to answer a question. Okay? So we'll get a little workout in the mornings. But do this, okay? All right. Somebody tell me, how did you get here this morning? You drove. All right. Somebody said they walked. How far did you walk? 0.6 miles. We've got it down. Okay. We walked. Before you drove, how did you get to your car?
I had to walk there, and I had to walk from the car to campus.
You had to walk from the car here. Okay. Anybody brush? Please tell me. Did anybody brush your teeth this morning? Okay. How did you brush? How do you brush your teeth? How do you walk? Muscles, right? Okay. How many of you are breathing at present? Right? I don't, okay, just checking. How do you breathe? Skeletal muscle. Okay? Your muscles use energy to generate force. That is the single most important thing to allow us to do basically everything that we do. You got to type, you got to use your muscles. You want to talk, you have to use muscles. You want to move, you want to do anything, breathe, you have to use skeletal muscle. Muscles generate force, force leads to movement. Sometimes you want to move and you can't, not enough force. Okay? More muscle, not the point of this class, more muscle, less cardiovascular disease risk, less type 2 diabetes risk. Okay? Some kinds of cancer risk. So muscle is good, right? Muscle keeps us healthy. It lets us move and all of these other different kinds of things. I will humbly put to you guys that all other physiological processes as they relate to exercise exist to support the ability or enhance the ability of skeletal muscle to generate force and allow you to move. Okay? Who's got I'm sure most of you do. Who's got a smartwatch on? No watch? Okay. Somebody look right now and tell me what your heart rate is. Sorry?
83.
83? Or you want to stand up and do some jumping jacks? You don't have to. If you stood up and did jumping jacks, what happens to your heart rate? It goes up, right? Heart rate goes up, cardiac output goes up, right? Y'all remember that from human physiology? I know some of y'all, we know what y'all do. I know some of y'all take the online version at Barton that the nursing school's not going to allow anymore on those things. Like I know, it's okay, right? You remember cardiac output. It goes up. Why does cardiac output have to go up when you move?
Blood supply.
To increase blood supply. Why do you need more blood supply?
Oxygen.
More oxygen to the muscles. Why do the muscles need the oxygen?
Electron transport change.
Okay.
It's ATP.
We're very specific. Yes, ATP. Why do muscles need ATP?
Cross-bridge cycle.
To cross-bridge cycle. Why do we need to cross-bridge cycle?
Generate force.
Wrong.
Muscle translate.
Close. Y'all are very close. Y'all have done so well And I apologize, I will come across sometimes as being very tacky and very rude. I will try to do all this, but y'all are doing great.
To shorten the length of muscle fiber?
No, actually. Okay. The most backwards, and this is not a part of today, we'll get it when we get to metabolism. The most backwards thing in all of physiology is you don't use energy to generate force. Okay. You use the energy to stop generating force so that you can then unhook the cross bridge, recock the myosin head, and generate force again. If you don't have any energy, right? You guys have heard of things in a dead body called rigor mortis, right? Why doesn't it move? Why are the muscles stuck? No energy. Okay. So y'all are right. So you can generate force once. You don't need energy, but to do it over and over again, which if I do this and I move my arm, right, thousands of cross bridge cycles happening. So I need a tremendous amount of energy. So y'all are right, but the details on all of that matter. Everything we do, why does breathing go up when you exercise? Well, you got to bring in more oxygen so you can put more oxygen into the blood that's moving more to get it more to the muscles that are doing, like you see how all of this works, right? This. But it all comes back to skeletal muscle. It all comes back to skeletal muscle, at least as it relates to exercise. Okay. You can tell all of our other professors that I said that muscle's the most important thing. Prove me wrong, right? Little mean thing or whatever. The guy sits at the table and it's like, wild statement. Prove me wrong, bro. I think muscle's the most important thing. Okay. So we're going to start with muscle. And I've covered most of these things, right? But muscles have one job, guys. One job, generate force. Okay? Generate force. We're going to have to work on how we do our word clouds when we do them again, or I can't let you guys see the word cloud until after you've texted your little thing in, because then everybody wants to be a comedian, which I appreciate very much. On all, but when we asked who's the strongest, a lot of it was like, well, who's got the biggest muscles? Right. Muscles generate force. Strength is force. Okay. So that's their job. Now, there's an interesting thing about muscle that makes skeletal muscle somewhat unique in comparison to some other muscles that are in your body. Okay? How many of you are thinking about your heart beating right now? If I told you to make your heart beat faster, could you? Maybe a little bit, right? I can make you, anybody want to stand up and sing for us? No, you want to get up on the desk and do something? I can make your heart rate go up. You can think about something. But for the most part, right? How long has your heart been beating in your life? And have you ever really thought about, make it beat, right? You never do anything else, right? That's all you would do. Cardiac muscle is not what we call voluntary, right? We can play, Dr. Black says, like put your arm up, put your arm down, put your leg out, do those kinds of things. Skeletal muscle is what we call voluntary. You have the ability from your motor cortex to tell muscle to contract, to tell it to relax, to tell it precisely how much force to generate, now, here, all of these other things. And that is driven by the motor cortex and the thing in your spinal cord called a motor neuron. Okay? Motor neurons are in our spinal cord. We'll talk a whole lot about those probably Monday of next week. Okay? Why are muscles and motor neurons important? Because when you exercise, you can argue about the extent to which exercise is voluntary for those of you that have ever had a father that is a football coach and those kinds of things. But you choose to do it. You choose how fast you're going, how high you're jumping, how much weight you're lifting most of the time, right? So we need this ability, all right, to have coordinated movements involving multiple muscle groups and a varied amount of force production, okay? You ever pick up something you thought was going to be really heavy and it wasn't, like a box you thought there was something in? You go, whoo, and you don't match the right amount of force. Okay. But as you're going, you make these immediate adjustments to save your posture and all of these things. All right. That is why muscles and motor neurons and how all the stuff fits together is so unbelievably important. We're going to start, though, not talking about the nervous system, but we're going to talk about the anatomy of skeletal muscle. We're going to talk about its organization. What is a muscle made up of? Why is it made up the way that it is? Okay, and why is that important? I will keep hitting on themes as we go that will tell us the anatomy and structure of skeletal muscle is absolutely 100% key to why it functions the way that it does. Okay? If it was not structured the way that it is, we don't have voluntary control. We lose an ability to generate more force. Okay? You lose the ability to do things quickly and to be precise and for muscle to allow us to move in the way that we do. Okay? So, structure imparts function. Anatomy imparts physiology. Structure, anatomy, function, physiology. Okay. All right. Just some general trivia. This is probably the point where I should tell those of you that have never worked in my lab that I've never had a class in anatomy. I've taught anatomy and physiology, but I've never had a class in anatomy. So take that for whatever you think it's worth. So when I say there are 660 muscles in your body, just know that I know the names of about 5 of them. Okay? I know the location of maybe those 5 and a couple more, even if I'm not 100% sure. Okay? But there's more than 650 muscles in your body. I want you guys to appreciate that muscles are the easiest way to understand the structure of a muscle is to understand the idea of a Russian nesting doll. Anybody know what a Russian nesting doll looks like? Anybody want to tell us? You want to share?
Doll inside a doll, inside a doll, inside a doll.
That's right. And what do they look like?
Progressively smaller dolls.
Progressively smaller and
Identical.
identical, right? Like I got a Dr. Pepper, and then inside my Dr. Pepper is an exact replica of this that's a smaller Dr. Pepper, and another, and another, and another, and it goes all the way down. Okay? Muscles are a series of, depending upon if you start in the big picture or the small, of tubes, inside of tubes, inside of tubes, inside of tubes. Okay? On the small end, you have tubes made up of individual proteins or filaments made up of individual proteins. And then we group those together into kind of a larger tube. And then we group those tubes together and together and together and together, and we move our way out. So we'll talk about that. They're made up of these tubes inside of tubes, and one of those tubes, not the biggest or the smallest, weirdly, are muscle cells, which are called muscle fiber. A muscle fiber is one of the largest cells in your entire body. I could cut open your leg, pull out one fiber, you can see it with the naked eye. Okay? So you can see one cell from a muscle with your naked eye. Okay? They're big, up to a couple of centimeters long. Okay? So they lie generally where they're all stacked up in your muscle in what we call parallel to each other. So they're all running, right? Like if I've got my bicep, please don't look at my bicep or my flabby tricep. I feel very sort of, I don't know what the right word is right now. Here, okay, this one, there's another one, and they're all running in the same direction, parallel to each other. That's going to become very important. Because they're so big, do you guys know why there are not bacteria that are the size of this room? What are they teaching y'all in Intro to Bio? Right? How many of you have had microbiology? Anybody had micro? A few of you guys, right? Need a microscope. Like, do y'all talk about why are bacteria small?
It's because of single cell.
They are single cell, but they could be giant single cells, right? But why are they small single cells? What do you know? They have one nuclei, right? They have one nuclei. Or I guess it would be one nucleus, right? So, muscle fibers are giant. You can see them with your naked eye. They're only able to be that big because they have many, many, many nuclei in them. Okay? It's the ability of the nuclei to make the proteins and all the other things that the cells need that allows them to get big. Okay? That makes muscle fibers unique in the cells in your body. Okay? They have many, many nuclei. Weirdly, the nuclei are out on the edges. They're not in the middle. That will become important. I'll show you guys a picture and you can guess why. Okay? But if we had bacteria that had many nuclei, they could be as big as we wanted them to be if they were able to do that. I don't know if that's scary. Is that a weird horror movie? I'm not sure. Okay. I guess it would depend if they were friendly bacteria or not. Okay. Now, some fibers are very small, a few millimeters, right? And the ones in the eye, and then some of the large muscles in the legs can be, some of them can be very, very big. Okay. A lot of them are in the level of just a few centimeters. Okay. This will be a point of contention, or at least a point of fun questions from a bro science perspective. Muscle is mostly water. Muscle is mostly water. Anybody taking creatine? You don't have to put your hand. If you're taking creatine, you feel like you swelled up. Yep. You know why? You take the creatine goes into your muscles, it draws water into the muscle. And so the muscle gets bigger. You're not any stronger. You don't have any more protein in the muscle. There's just more water that's in there. We can debate all day long if that's good or bad in some instances, but that is actually a thing. 75% water, okay? About 20% protein, which is why all the bros take so much protein. Okay, we think the protein is really important. It is to a point, sometimes, probably if you're my age, more so, but we'll cover that in way more. And then there's about 5% that's salts and other things. Sodium, potassium, there's other ions, calcium, and things that are going to be in there. But muscles are mostly water. Okay? Muscles are mostly water. All right. Here is our Russian nesting doll of a muscle fiber. Okay? Or I guess of a muscle. Here is a bone. I think probably that's a femur. I don't know. Kind of looks like it could be the femur. But you've got the whole muscle here. Okay? Cut open the top layer of the muscle, right? Cut through the connective tissue that we call fascia. And what you will see is a collection of bundles of muscle fibers in that one big muscle. Those bundles are called a fascicle. You cut through the connective tissue around a fascicle, right? And you open them up and you see what's in each little bundle, right, is more little bundles, right? But you've got fascicles. Fascicles are composed of a bunch of fibers. Fibers are the cells. You cut open one fiber, and the fiber starts to look like, here's one fiber. It has all of these things. These are what are called myofibrils. Myofibrils are made up of sarcomeres. Now we're getting to a place where things actually help us to function. Okay? You see a sarcomere, you get one sarcomere stacked next to another one. That's that tube that makes a myofibril. And then the sarcomeres are the things that are made up of the individual proteins of actin and myosin especially. Okay? All of the actual force production, all of the ATP use, all of those things happen down here. Okay? They happen down here on this kind of very, very microscopic level. But when things happen here and these move, it pulls on the myofibrils that pull on the fibers, that pull on the fascicle, that pull on the muscle, that pulls on a tendon, that pulls your bone and allows you to move. Okay? So if we disrupt things as it goes up, right, then we don't get a muscle contraction, we don't get movement. We have to have connective tissue here or things won't be able to go. But we're going to spend a lot of our time focused very, very closely down on this level, okay? Kind of on the sarcomere level, on the individual protein level to understand how muscles work. I mentioned connective tissue, okay? All I want you all to know is that there are multiple layers of connective tissue. There's generally a layer of connective tissue that surrounds the whole muscle, that surrounds the fascicles, and surrounds the fibers, okay? And so what we're going to call that is the outside layer is something called the epimysium, sometimes referred to as the deep fascia or fascia. That would be the first thing when you cut into a muscle that you would see, okay? Then there is additional connective tissue that surrounds the fascicles. That's called the paramycium. And then we have the endomycium, which is going to be connective tissue down here in and around the individual fibers. Connective tissue is important because it's stretchy. Okay? It's stretchy. And it provides a loose ability to hold things together. It holds our cylinders together. And because it's stretchy, you can bend, you can generate force, you can do all kinds of things, and it will transmit that force along it. It will stretch out, it allows for movement, and then it will go back to its original state. Okay? You get to be my age, right? I have really bad ankles. I have not exactly broken, but I've really messed up my ankles playing football and baseball when I was younger. And so my ankles are really loose. I've stretched out all of that connective tissue. And so basically, like, I'll just be walking and like do a weird thing and my ankle will just roll over because it's, you know, I'm old and those things happen. But this is stuff that we need to understand. I've stretched out some of this. It would be useful if we could do something to fix it. But that's what I want you all to know about those things. Okay. Okay. I said we were going to zoom in. So we're going to zoom in a little bit more now. This right here is sort of a cartoon depiction of a piece of a muscle fiber. So we've gone whole muscle down to fascicle. Then we've got these individual fibers in those fascicles. We've taken one, we've cut it on the ends, and we've cut it open so we can see what's inside. Okay. The cell membrane. All cells have a membrane. Think back to your intro to bio class, okay? Muscle fibers have a lipid bilayer, just like most other cells, that surround them. We call that the sarcolemma. Most things with muscle are going to be called myo or sarco, which is just a prefix that means muscle, okay? One is Greek and one's probably Latin, and I should know the difference between those, but I don't. But the membrane around the muscle fiber is called the sarcolemma. We're going to talk a lot about things that are in the sarcolemma and how the sarcolemma lets us control a muscle contraction. Okay? If you pull the sarcolemma off, which they do sometimes they'll pull out individual fibers, they'll pull the sarcolemma off. You can change all the characteristics of that fiber. Okay? But it's really, really important. Under the sarcolemma, there's something called the basement membrane. I mentioned the basement membrane just so you know that there's some scaffolding, right? It's like the framing inside of a house that holds your walls up and everything. Okay. If you guys have heard of a disease called muscular dystrophy, okay, or Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, dystrophin is a protein that exists in the basement membrane. And if you have muscular dystrophy, the dystrophin doesn't work correctly, is not formed correctly. So the basement membrane doesn't hold its stuff up correctly. So the muscle fibers are real squishy and lack proper function. So it's going to be important. Okay. But we're only going to just cover a couple of very brief things about that. All right. These gold structures here, okay, are called transverse tubules or T tubule, right? A T tubule is a tunnel, okay? It's a tunnel. It's a tunnel that connects to the sarcolemma. If you did not have T tubules, then our ability to voluntarily turn skeletal muscle on and off would be wildly impaired and wildly different. Okay. But what the T tubule lets us do is take a signal that's on the sarcolemma and bring it down through that tunnel down into the inside of the muscle fiber where the myofibrils are, where the sarcomeres are, where the proteins that generate force are. Okay. If I had someone stand up and do a wall sit until fatigue, anybody want to volunteer? You don't have to, because nobody really wants to. Okay. If I had you stand up and do a wall sit. By the time you could no longer do the wall sit, one of the primary reasons that you would need to stop is because the ability to send the signals through the T tubule have become impaired. This is one of the most common sites of fatigue when you do exercise. And so we need to understand its structure. We need to understand how signals get transmitted because this is a place where movement and exercise fails. Okay. This is a place where it fails. Okay. Now, the kind of dark red structure here, this webbing network, which this is probably not the most accurate depiction of it. Okay. This is a structure called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. A lot of the inside of a muscle fiber is SR. It's just a storage site for calcium. Okay, a storage site for calcium. The T tubule is going to be directly connected to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. We'll zoom in and talk about what that looks like, okay, a little bit later today. But the sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium. Without calcium, no muscle contraction. Conversely, too much calcium not in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and we get a thing called apoptosis, right? The cells will kill themselves. So if you damage the sarcoplasmic reticulum, those cells will probably die and then regenerate on all of that. So it's really, really important, okay? Two other structures to be aware of. What you see out here in purple, that's the nucleus. Now, in this piece, you can only see one nucleus. I will show you some pictures of a bigger fiber, more of the fiber, and you will see there are nuclei everywhere. Okay, nuclei everywhere. So what the nuclei primarily do is the nucleus is the thing that bros want to activate to turn on the genes that will make more actin and myosin to make the muscles bigger. Okay, repair of a fiber is driven out of the nucleus. Okay. Repair of any of these other kinds of things. They're really, really important. But exercise will have some dramatic effects on the nucleus. Pretty cool. Okay. Now, you can't see them here. I'll show them in the next slide. There are also things that look like nuclei in muscle fibers that make them unique among cells, and they're called a satellite cell. Okay. A satellite cell. A satellite cell is a muscle-specific stem cell. Okay. Now, we normally think of stem cells in the context of cells that can become anything, right? Cells that can become anything else. These are cells that have already committed down the line. They're only going to become muscle fibers, right? But they are amazingly important for muscle growth and for muscle repair, okay? And we will, when we get into talking about resistance training and hypertrophy and mechanistic things about all of that, we'll talk about how and why we activate these satellite cells. Okay. And if we do things to you that damage the satellite cells, we can ruin the ability of your muscles to get bigger. Okay. There are animal models of things where they take the animals, they zap them with radiation, they kill off their satellite cells, they have them exercise. They don't really exercise them. They have them do other terrible things. And they would normally make their muscles get bigger. No satellite cells, no hypertrophy. Watch. Okay. But they're really, really important. Okay. So there's going to be some slides on these things. I've covered most of what is there already. So we're gonna kind of move our way on. I do want to mention one thing here. Okay. The location where the T tubules connect to the sarcoplasmic reticulum is called a terminal cisternae. A terminal cisternae. Okay. That's an important term because at the terminal cisternae, there's going to be several receptors, and it's generally those receptors that get messed up and cause fatigue. Okay. All right. So let me show you those receptors. Let me tell you what they're named. and we can see how all of this is going to fit together. Okay. What you see up here in green on the top, this is a piece of a T-tube. This is the part of the tunnel we've gone down into the fiber. We tunneled our way down inside of our muscle fiber. This area here, this membrane structure, this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So all the calcium is here on the inside. This is the membrane of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Here's our T-tube. Okay. We have generated an action potential. It's moved across the sarcolemma. It's going down the T-tubule. It's moving through the T-tubule, and it will reach this sort of orangey colored or orangey red receptor here called the dihydropyridine receptor, or DHP. Okay, dihydropyridine. This is a voltage sensitive, which means that it gets activated or it changes its shape when an action potential reaches it. Okay, so it's a voltage gated or voltage sensitive receptor. It is on the T-tube. Anytime you want to initiate a contraction in a muscle, you need to activate the DHP receptor. Okay, so action potential travels, gets to the DHP receptor, it activates the DHP receptor, which then signals across to the sarcoplasmic reticulum to this receptor that you can see right there in green. It's called the ryanodine receptor. Often abbreviated as the RYR receptor. It's the ryanodine receptor. All right. The ryanodine receptor is the thing, it looks like a little bottle top with a stopper in it. Okay. And when DHP gets activated, it pulls the stopper out, opens the ryanodine receptor, and calcium flows out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum out here into the cytoplasm of our muscle fiber. All right, then the calcium will do other things to initiate a contraction. But DHP signals to ryanodine and determines if ryanodine is open or closed. So we get action potential, activate DHP, open ryanodine, calcium comes out, that gets us a contraction. DHP gets turned off, ryanodine closes back up, and then now we're going to start trying to pull calcium back in. Okay, but these two things are primary sites of muscular fatigue during exercise. Our ability to turn those on and off at the right time. Okay. Why do I drink Dr. Pepper in the morning? Caffeine. Okay. I'll give you all a little secret. My bro science of the day. All supplements are shit except for caffeine. That's not 100% true. Creatine's fine, protein's fine. Everything else, nah. I'm serious. The rest of it, you're probably wasting your money. Okay? Your pre-workout, you know what's in your pre-workout that works? Caffeine. There's beta-alanine and some other things that are going to make you feel weird and like, ooh, my skin is tingly and all of this. That's on purpose, right? Doesn't help the exercise. The caffeine is what works. Why does the caffeine work? Because in a significant enough dose, caffeine can have some interactions potentially at the ryanodine receptor. Probably not the main reason that it works for us, but of all the, and actually caffeine's not a supplement, technically caffeine's a drug. Do you guys know that? It's not considered a drug in the doses that are in soft drinks. If you want to have a higher dose, you got to call it an energy drink in the midst of all of that. And then we don't regulate it in coffee at all on those kinds of things. But anyway, don't take pre-workout. Go to Walmart if you're a pre-workout person. Go buy NoDoz. The generic Walmart version of NoDoz are 200 milligram caffeine pills. That's pretty equivalent to what you get in your pre-workout. You can buy 50 of them for $4, right? Rather than your pre-workout. The creatine in your pre-workout doesn't do it like that. Creatine works, but not the stuff in your pre-workout. It's crazy. We'll talk more about that. But understanding, I say all of that. Sorry, guys. I say all of it. I will try through class to do all of this. I'll get off on a tangent. We talked about that. But I will try to bring it back that I want you to understand how all of these receptors work, how they interact with each other, how this generates force, because these are areas where we can get fatigued. These are areas where drugs and supplements and things may or may not act, and that may have consequences on your exercise performance or your rehab performance or whatever it's going to be in that way. If we understand the underlying structures and physiology, we can think our way backwards into, should that work? Should that not work? I don't really know. Okay. On all of those kinds of things. All right. And that's the part of being informed consumer, understand things, understand how to apply this stuff kind of in your life. Okay. All right. Here's the mitochondria, right? Everyone knows, Dr. Black, that's the powerhouse of the cell, right? There we go. And so we all learn on these things. You guys are absolutely right. We'll talk a lot more about mitochondria and the electron transport chain and how and why they work, and the fact that they have their own set of genes. If you have a lot of mitochondria, they all came from your mom. Tell your mom thank you. Okay? So everybody text your mom right now. Your mom wants you to text her. Okay? Channeling mine in the midst of all of this. But mitochondria generate ATP. We have mitochondria in the muscle fibers, down inside in the fibers. Everybody has a different amount. The amount you have is dependent upon genetics. It's also dependent upon how well aerobically trained you are. We can manipulate how many of these you have and how well they work. Okay. But we'll get into the different membranes, what they mean, where the electron transport chain is, where the Krebs cycle is, and all of that when we get to metabolism. I just want you to know now that we have the machinery that makes the ATP in the muscle fiber, very, very close to the place where we need to use the ATP. Okay. Because if I have to make the ATP in my brain and then transport it to my calf or my quad, then that takes time. And I might get tired while I'm doing that. Or, right, back in the olden days, when we were evolving as a species, if we will, that might be, if it takes time, then something catches me and eats me, right? We won't talk about it. It doesn't have to be Jurassic Park or anything, but something kind of like that. So you had a question, and then the girl on the right. I see y'all. Go ahead.
So does the ryanodine receptor and the SERCA enzyme work directly with the T tubule?
Great question. Okay. And I forgot to talk about SERCA. So the ryanodine receptor is in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it only works with the T tubule insofar as the DHP receptor is connected to it.
Okay, so
that's it. So
to get that signal and then it releases.
It gets the signal.
T tubule.
That's right. Okay. It does that. Okay. Now there are some instances when you don't activate the DHP receptor and you still get calcium release out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum when you don't want, but that's a whole other deal. Okay. Okay, we'll go.
It's kind of random, but so if genetically you have more mitochondria, does that mean that you're naturally like faster, or like, you know, like people are just like
Yes.
players or
So the short answer is yes. We have to be careful about saying fast. If you have a lot of mitochondria genetically, okay, then you are predisposed, I'll be very careful here, to responding better to aerobic or sort of distance type training, which means you are probably predisposed to being a better endurance athlete. Okay. And so those things are not the same as I'm fast. I might be fast at running a mile, but that may be different than I'm fast running 50 meters or something like all of that. Okay. And some of that's related to muscle fiber type, which we'll get into on Friday. But the short answer is yes. Okay. Even here at the collegiate level, right? If you take our Division I athletes on some of these things, okay, generally, the people that are really, really fast are way off genetically on one end. They are outliers. If you think of sort of genetic distributions on a normal curve, most of us are somewhere kind of in the middle on a lot of those things. And then people are going to be off on I'm really slow, I'm probably genetically, that's just a fiber type thing, that's where I am. Or if I'm really fast, you also tend to be able to jump really high in these things. It means you have a lot of type 2 muscle fibers. You're way off out here. A lot of that is 100% determined by genetics. Thank your parents or curse your parents. It's just the way that it is. Okay. Now, mitochondria, so we'll get a feel. You can be a fast switcher. You can not have a lot of genetic predisposition to have mitochondria. And I can train you with distance running. I can give you a lot more mitochondria. I can make every one of you a much, much better endurance athlete than you currently are. You may never be elite, but I can turn every one of you into a marathon runner if you're willing to suffer. Okay. We can do that. I can't make any of you into much of a better sprinter than you are right now. You're either fast or you're not. I can't make any of you within a little bit of a reason be able to jump much higher than what you can right now. You either have that, that's force, that's explosion. We'll talk about that on Friday. You either have it or you don't. Okay. So there we go. And that's the more fun stuff to talk about, right? I want to talk about that. But if we understand all of this and the receptors and these things, then that stuff makes more sense. Okay. I forgot to tell you all about circa. Let me back up. Not an uncommon thing for me. Circa. Anybody ever had cramp? Okay. You get a muscle contraction. You don't want a muscle contraction. What you want to happen is you want it to stop, right? You want it to stop. You've never wanted it to stop more than when a 6-year-old is yelling that she's having a cramp in the middle of the night because she refuses to drink any water during the day, and everyone just wants to be asleep on those things. But you release the calcium, you get a muscle contraction. The contraction lasts until you take that calcium and put it back in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? So, one of the things that we need to do then is we need a mechanism by which we take the calcium that's been released and we pull it back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And the way that we do that is an enzyme. Okay? It's called circa, or its technical name is the calcium ATP ACE. The ACE denotes that it's an enzyme. About, I won't say a third, but a significant portion of the energy that you expend during a bout of exercise comes from using ATP to run this enzyme to pull the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? Think of circa as a vacuum cleaner, right? There's a vacuum cleaner. It's sitting on right there on the edge. There's multiple of them on the edge of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. You release the calcium. As soon as it gets released, we turn on the vacuum cleaner and we start trying to pull it back in. Like immediately, it starts getting pulled back in. And that costs us a little bit of energy, but we want to do that so that we can turn off the muscle contraction. Okay, so we can turn off the contraction. As we will get into next week, our ability to precisely control when we turn a contraction off in a lot of instances is almost, if not more important than when it gets turned on, because that lets us control how much force we have. It lets us control the speed of a contraction and some other things. So this is a really, really important thing. Okay. Circa is dependent upon muscle fiber type. Okay. Fast twitch muscle fibers, their circa pump, their vacuum is more powerful. It works faster. Okay. Slow twitch fibers, their circa works slower. And that will have some important implications down the line. Huh? All right, so we've covered those. How am I doing on time? Oh boy. Okay. Here's an electron micrograph of a muscle fiber. All of the little white things that are on there are either nuclei or satellite cells. Okay. They're either nuclei or satellite cells. So this is going to cover a distance of about 0.5 centimeter or thereabouts, and you can see how many nuclei we have and how many satellite cells we have. Many, 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 many nuclei in a muscle cell, which is good. Some of you are genetically predisposed to respond better to resistance training than others. One hypothesis is that some of you naturally have more myonuclei than others. And if you have more myonuclei, you have the nuclei to make the protein to support a bigger fiber. Therefore, you may respond better and be able to have bigger muscles if we do those things. We don't really know if that's true, but it's a suggestion on all of that. Okay. Here are nuclei on the outside. Here's a satellite cell. It looks just like a nuclei, but it's in this kind of encased in this extra membrane. Okay. There are things about resistance training that we want to do that are going to help us activate these satellite cells. So it's really apparent here. So I'll ask the question with this. Why are the nuclei on the outside? Most of the time, nuclei are in the middle. Why are muscle ones on the outside?
Inside for fibers.
We use the inside for fibers. Very close. What are these? Anybody know what these are? Sarcomeres, some myofibrils, sarcomeres. That's the protein. Where does the force in a muscle come from? All this stuff, right? So if I'm taking up space in the middle, see, hang on, taking up space in the middle with a nuclei, then there's less space for actin and myosin and sarcomeres and the things that generate force. You guys will see as we go through all of this that muscle fibers are in some ways perfectly designed to maximize sarcomeres and protein in them in order to allow us to generate the most force out of any given amount of space. Okay, and that's why the nuclei are on the outside. Haley, you have a question?
Is it like it all for when like the contraction happens to not like crush the nuclei, or is there something there?
It's a great question. I've never thought about that. No one's ever asked that. I don't know. Obviously, when we generate the force, we don't squish them. And maybe being on the outside helps them from all of that. I honestly don't know. That's going to linger with me, though. I have to now go look around and see if we can find. There are people that have videos of individual muscle fibers, and they zoom down and you can watch them contract. We should probably watch and see what's happening with the nuclei, and they're bending around and doing things. Okay. For Friday. Okay, for Friday. And I think we have it set up correctly in Canvas. We need to chat time. There is an assignment that is posted. And there's a sheet, there's a Word document there. I need you guys to fill it out. You're going to tell me your name, where are you from, something interesting about yourself. What do you want me to call you? How do you think this class is going to help you? What do you want to do with your life? And it's going to ask you for bro science questions. Okay? Fill that out, turn it in on Canvas. Ty and I will put it all together and try to organize the questions into some groups, and we'll do things like that. That is due, I believe, by class time on Friday. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
Or by, it says 7 a.m.
Oh, by 7 a.m. on Friday. Okay.
To do that before.
All right. See y'all then.
Okay, so I am taking Google AI's answer because it sounds correct, but it's actually. Okay, we're gonna make a translation.